Okay, so if you've been along to any EAS sessions yet this year, you may have seen this slide. Okay, so this is all to do with Simon Breakspear and his salient experiences. Okay, some of the information you might receive tonight or over the program, which is going to be 5 sessions long in total, okay, might be new to you, so you might consider how you might implement this back in your classroom. Some of the things that we share might be familiar, and you may want to enhance that and sort of develop on the skills and knowledge that you already know, or you may be experienced in this area and you might act as a mentor or a coach to others in your school. So as you go through a session, consider how some of these things may relate to you and how you might take them back and use them in your classroom. So for the sessions in total, as I said, there are 5 sessions that will build on each other as the weeks go on. Okay, today's session is looking at creating a sort of an introduction to digitally inclusive classrooms and creating accessible content for our learners, or it could be that for presentations that you do for parents, for governors, or for the wider audiences. But over the program, you can see here there are 7 success criteria that we're going to consider. Today was about accessible content. Next week will be about inclusive reading. The following session will be about inclusive writing. Then the session after that will be the inclusive communication, and then finally looking at a range of apps that explore inclusivity in your classroom. But today we're just going to focus on these 3 in particular. So we're going to try and look at gaining a greater understanding of what it means to be a digitally inclusive classroom. We're going to consider some successes and challenges that we may have with inclusivity in the classroom, and then we're going to consider how we begin to create accessible content as we go through. So, if you'd like to tonight, if you'd like to share any of your learning as you go through, please do tag us in on Twitter if you're on Twitter using our EAS handle, which is EAS_digital. You can also use the hashtag equity, access and support, and also hashtag in there Microsoft Edu for the tools that we're going to be using as well. So, something to consider before we start a session. Every single person in this room or in this group today has probably got a child within their class that has an additional learning need or has needs in the classroom that needs support as part of your learning process. Okay, now every single child learns differently, and we know that, and each child will need a different tool and different ways of accessing the content they need in order to succeed. We now have the ability to meet any of those needs without the stigma attached to learning challenges. So students will have the tools to consume content that we provide them independently. One thing that I know and that we know as educators is students like to blend in. And I suppose this sentiment is captured in the powerful quote which you can see on the screen there. Students would rather go without than stand out, which means essentially students with educational needs would rather sit there and suffer without any extra support than ask for it from a teacher. So that, for me, that really made me think when I read that quote and how powerful that actually was. So as educators, it's our job to ensure a safe and accessible environment for our students. So can I just ask you in the chat, can you please rating from 1 to 5, 1 being you have no experience or no exposure to accessibility tools, to 5 being I'm really confident with accessibility tools. I've had lots of experience and lots of exposure. So if you just pop in the chat for me how you would rate yourself in terms of the exposure and the experience you have with using accessibility tools in the classroom. Fantastic, we've got a few coming through. So we've got 1s and 2s to start off with. I've had a couple of 2s. Fantastic, yeah. Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so I can see most of us are sort of early on in our journeys in terms of what tools are out there, what we can use to support learners in the classroom. Now, thankfully, through Hub and through the Microsoft tools that we have available to us, there are a range of tools that are available to support all learners in your classroom. And over these 5 sessions, we're going to go through each one of those, and you're going to have the opportunity to have a look at them and think about how you could use those back in your classroom. So I want you to leave these 5 sessions with the knowledge that the tools that you're going to get are going to help you build a foundation for your students' future success. So using inclusive education tools helps students grow their potential and gain independence both inside and outside the classroom. Teachers are more empowered to engage every learner when they have the knowledge of what inclusive classroom tools are out there. And finally, schools build reputations of positive places that promote equity and inclusion, which I suppose is any school's end goal. So essentially what we're looking to do throughout this programme is look at developing students' independence, looking at ways that you as practitioners are more empowered to engage with those tools, and look at then as a school how you can use those tools to promote equity and inclusion. So the 5 sessions are focused around the goal of promoting independent learning. Now this slide was created to show you the wide range of needs or disabilities that we may come across in our classrooms. We want you to know, and I want you to know, that the tools that we're going to talk about over the sessions will not only help support the students that fall under these categories, but today's tools will help all students. You can find out a bit more around Microsoft's accessibility features using the link at the bottom there. If you click on that, it will take you to some more information about the accessibility features that are available for you to use. This presentation will also be shared in the files area of the team once this session is finished. So here are some key considerations for building a foundation for an accessible learning environment. Okay, how do we as practitioners create a connected learning experience that bridges learning with the home and the community? What are we doing to create the links between home, between the community and between school, and how are we using those tools to be able to do that? How are we as practitioners cultivating lifelong skills that foster greater independence? What systems are we building and structures are we using that reduce the barriers to learning and aid learners with their organisation as they're developing these skills? We're looking at building a foundation for a personalised learning experience with appropriate hardware, and we're very lucky with the EdTech grant that we've been given a lot of these resources that we can use in our classrooms. And also, how can we access timely data to select meaningful interventions? So what tools are we going to use for each of those learners in the classroom based on the data that we've gathered? That could be data that you know as a teacher or a practitioner firsthand, or data that these tools will provide you when you're using them in the classroom. So quite a few times I'm asked quite often, what are learning tools? So an example of a learning tool might be an overlay that could be placed on paper to support reading for a dyslexic learner, which is great. But more often than not, these tools come at a cost and can take time to arrive at your school or in your classroom. Now, Microsoft creates these amazing tools so that students do not have to feel like outsiders in the classroom. All students learn differently, and it's our jobs as educators to foster that learning by showing students the tools that they can use to personalise their learning experience. So you can see here on the slide that the tools that we're going to use today are free, they're built in, they're mainstream, and they're non-stigmatizing for all students, okay? Now, if you could think of any other tools that you might have in the classroom, I gave the example of an overlay for a dyslexic learner. Could you pop into the chat and I'll give you sort of one minute to discuss with the other people in your room. What other tools might you use in your classroom that could support learners with their learning? So the example I gave obviously was the overlay for dyslexic learners, but what other tools do we use in the classroom today that can support accessibility and inclusivity for all? I'll just give you 60 seconds, have a little think about that, and pop some examples in the chat for me, please. Yeah, so we've got microphones. Yeah, good example there of how we can use that for sort of speech to text stuff that we're gonna look at in session 3. Access to a laptop as well, definitely. Yeah, having the resources available for children to be able to access content in the classroom. Thank you very much for that response there. Another 10, 15 seconds on that one. Okay. Some other examples that I've thought of are potentially things that children sit on to help them with their posture. They may have sort of I think they're called ramps on the desk to help them when they're writing, so they're giving their wrist the proper support. So lots of different tools that we could use in the classroom to support our learners, but we're going to focus on specifically digital ones, the free ones that are available to you in every classroom across Wales as well. Now, one of our goals when we're using these digital tools must be to lessen cognitive load. So cognitive load is the mental effort exerted to complete a task. Okay, so for those of you not familiar with cognitive load theory, it's comprised of three components, which you can see here on the screen. You've got intrinsic load, extraneous load, and germane load. With only finite space in the working memory, managing the cognitive load of a task helps a learner transfer information from their working memory into their long-term memory. Now, how a task is designed and presented impacts a learner's ability to move information from working memory to their long-term memory. And I often think about, for me as well, around sort of handwriting practice. Now, we always do handwriting practice, or we always have done in schools, practice our handwriting so that when children are writing, they're fluent writers and they haven't got to think about how letters are formed. Now, the same can be said for typing practice. How often do we as schools develop typing skills? Because I often found, and I've just come out of classroom myself, I often found that learners sometimes couldn't translate what they were thinking from their memory onto the screen because it was taking them too long to navigate their way around a keyboard. So what do we do? What tools do we provide those children to be able to develop their typing skills, make them a little bit more fluent, so that when they're thinking of those ideas, there isn't a barrier then with their working memory from taking that information and putting it into the screen. And this can be seen through lots of the tools that we're going to share throughout the 5 sessions. Okay, so things to consider on the tools that we're using and how they're going to support lessening the cognitive load with each of our learners. So for this session, like I said, we're going to look at a small introduction to inclusive classrooms. We're going to consider some successes and challenges of an inclusive classroom, and then we're going to consider how we create accessible content. Now, today's session is going to be fairly short. The following 4 sessions then are going to be a bit more in-depth and more in detail around what tools are available and how we can use those in the classroom. But this gives us a little flavour of what this programme is going to be about. So what I'd like to do now, you should be able to click on the link now on the screen. I want you to head across to our whiteboard space in that Teams area that you've got, okay? So when you click on that link, and if anyone has any issues with that link, please let me know. When you click on that link, what will happen is it will take you across to a whiteboard. Now, the whiteboard is quite similar to the Jamboard. For those of you who've used Jamboard on Google, this is almost like Microsoft's equivalent, but this sits inside Teams. And you can see that I've added sort of some green sticky notes and some red sticky notes onto the screen there. What I'd like you to do on the green sticky notes is I want you to consider some successes for accessibility in your classroom. So what things do you do in your classroom now that are really successful? Okay, so for example, you might be using a timetable in the classroom. So it's a visual timetable for your learners, and how are you using that then to make sure that everyone can access the learning that you're providing? Okay, so in the successes area, I want you to think about your classroom and your students. What do you do to meet the individual needs of all the learners in the classroom? And I want you to write those on the green sticky notes for me, please. And then in the challenges area, on the right-hand side, which is the red sticky notes, I want you to think about your classroom, but I want you to think about the challenges you've faced when it comes to meeting the individual needs of all the learners, and write those on the red sticky notes on the right, okay? So essentially all you'll need to do is click onto the sticky note, start typing away, and you'll be able to add the information that you need to those sticky notes. So I'm just going to give you 3 minutes to do that. I'd love it if we could sort of get as many sticky notes on there as possible for all the things that we think we do well and all the things that we find challenging in our classroom. Okay, everyone, thank you for engaging in that task. If you'd like to come back to the presentation, we'll just go through some of the examples that we've got there. So just looking at some of the successes that we have around sort of accessibility and the tools we have available. So using voice recordings to allow children to write or type what they want to say. Yeah, so some of these speech to text features within not just Microsoft now, but also within Google are really, really powerful. We've got the children being able to access the text using the features of Immersive Reader. And for those of you not aware of Immersive Reader, it's a fantastic tool that we're going to cover in next week's session that allows all learners in the classroom to access any sort of text or any sort of reading within platforms on the computer, which is great. Video access on iPads to record pupil voice, linked to learning task, absolutely. Visual class and individual timetables with regular checkbacks and discussions. Now, our next strategies, yes, those things that we do that aren't digitally based, so those things we have in the classroom all the time. The individual timetable, really important for those learners who need structure and routine throughout the day, and those now are next strategies. And then we've got access to laptops, iPads, and Chromebooks. Again, just having those resources available is a success in terms of having accessibility for our learners. In terms of challenges, consistent Wi-Fi, particularly if we're using something digital, having consistent Wi-Fi is really important. And then also knowing what apps we need to access, we can access to support learning. And I suppose that one for everyone is probably a challenge for everyone, is that time to explore, giving that time to actually look at what's available and play around with it before we share it with our learners. But also, it could be cost, so things like overlays and so on can be costly. The time it takes for it to arrive in your classroom, they're all kinds of challenges that we may come across as practitioners on a day-to-day basis. So what we're hoping to do through these sessions is show you tools that are available here and now and free to access for all those learners as we go through. So what does an inclusive classroom mean? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to break it down into 3 categories throughout this training. Okay, now pretty much every school I know will probably care about these categories. We're going to look at reading, we're going to look at writing, and we're going to look at communication. We've also got maths on there as another tool that we could look at as well. But what we try to do is infuse the inclusive design principles into each of these categories that are available. Now today is all about education inclusiveness that benefits all students, not just students with needs or those who speak a different language or anything along those lines, okay? Accessibility in the classroom is an important part of inclusiveness for all students. Now, accessibility can apply to multiple demographics in the classroom, including students with reading disabilities, students whose home language is not English, and even gifted students as well, or those more able students. We need to be able to provide tools that can support all learners across our classroom. Now, using the principles of inclusive design, Microsoft has applied those to the 4 foundation pillars of education, which you can see on the screen: reading, writing, maths, and communication. So before we dive into the tools that we can use with our students, we need to better understand how to create content that is accessible to all students regardless of ability. Now, we have tools built into Office, both desktop and the online versions, that make it very easy for users to check their content to make sure it's accessible to those who may use screen readers, those with visual impairments, or those with executive functioning needs. Not only is our duty as educators to create that content that's accessible, but also now as part of the new ALM bill, we need to do everything we can to support all learners within the classroom. So how are we going to do this, and where do we start? So what we're going to do is I'm going to jump out of this presentation now, and I'm going to have a look at some of those accessibility tools within PowerPoint, which is also available in Word, and how we can use those tools to create accessible content for our learners, for our governors, for our parents, or for anyone that we present to. Now, one of the easiest things to remember is to have you and have students start with the How Can I Help You tool in Microsoft. So if you're in any Microsoft application now, you might want to open up Word or PowerPoint. Okay, you can use Alt and Q on your keyboard to open up the How Can I Help You tab. Okay, if you can't find it as well, it's also under the Review tab, but Alt-Q is such a fantastic way to teach anyone how to find the tools. So you can use Alt-Q, and I'll demonstrate that for you now. Okay. So I'm in PowerPoint here, and if I press Alt-Q, it will then give me a list of sort of suggested actions at the top, but I can also search then or find how to do certain things. Okay, so you can search in there and it will give you a guide on what you potentially can or can't do with those tools. Okay, So as you can see now, I'm in PowerPoint. I've opened up a presentation that is there, ready to go. And as part of this presentation then, there are lots of things that I need to be able to do to this presentation in order to ensure that everybody can access that presentation, okay? Now to do that, okay, I'm going to use the accessibility checker. So across the ribbon at the top here, you can see one that says review. Now when you click on to review, okay, you've then got the second one across there is check accessibility. So when I click on to check accessibility, what it will do is it will then open up on the right hand side then all of the accessibility errors and warnings that I have throughout this presentation. So it's really important that what I do is I use these features to help me make sure that my presentation is accessible to all people or all learners who are accessing it, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look now, first of all, is alternative text. Okay, so what exactly is alternative text? You can see here on the right hand side in my errors, I've got 5 images that are missing alternative text. Now, you might say it's missing it, but how do I know what it is? Now, you can always read why it's important in the accessibility checker. Alternative text provides a description for a photo or an object so that a person who is blind can understand the context. The feature to manually add or change alternative text is now conveniently located on the right-click menu in Office. Now, as remember, you need to provide alternative text on your charts, your graphs, and other media as well. So essentially, if I click onto this image here and I right-click, I will then get an option here that says View Alternative Text. And when I click on that, okay, it then brings up a box on the right-hand side of the screen for me here to be able to describe that object. So what it's asking you to do, how would you describe this object and its context as somebody who is blind or has low vision? Things we should consider including are the subject and its detail, the setting, the actions or interactions, or some other relevant information. But what you'll really see here is that actually we can generate alternative text for me. So the automatic alternative text leverages intelligent image analysis to automatically give suggestions for you and descriptions for you for images in both PowerPoint and Word. The auto alt text helps save you time and ensures your media-rich PowerPoint presentations, Word documents, and Outlook emails can be consumed and understood by people with blindness or visual impairments. So when I click on to generate alternative text for me, what it should do then is it will generate text that I can include as part of this image. But typically, as I'm doing a demonstration on digital, it's not working for me. Let's try it again. There we go. So the alternative text that's generated for me is a person wearing a yellow shirt, and that description has been automatically generated with medium confidence. So I can get rid of that because I don't need it, and then I can just save that into my image like so. So when I click onto here now and view alternative text, it will say that on the side there. So a person wearing a yellow shirt. So anyone with visual impairment or blindness or low vision will be able to access these images. You'll also see then that as I click on the right hand side, I've got a range of different things that are also without alternative text. So I can go through each of those. I can right click onto the alternative text again. I can generate that text for me, okay, and it will sometimes present what I need it to, but other times it won't. So I might need to then go into here and change that. So an image of a person running. So not every time it will be accurate, but I can go in there and I can edit that then. I can also mark it as decorative if I want to as well. But in this instance, I'm going to change that alternative text to just that. So what you can see is it will create alternative text and it will provide descriptions then of images without a content creator needing to add it. Okay, so really a powerful tool and really important that we include these things when we're considering creating our content. Other things that we need to consider as we go through then is how our slides and the color contrast in our slides are accessible within our presentations. So when you're creating accessible presentations, it's important to use a large font size and high contrasting colors. Okay, so you can see here that this one has got a purple background with almost like a dark blue green colour on it, which isn't very helpful in terms of being able to read, and readability is quite difficult. So high contrast increases the colour, okay, color contrast of text and images on your screen, making them easier to identify. And you'll also see then on the accessibility features on the right-hand side, in the warning section, we've got the hard to read text contrast. So when I click onto that, it will then give me recommended font color and recommended shape fill. So when I then use the recommended font color and shape fill, you can see then how the contrast of those colors changes, and it becomes easier to read the title on the screen. Okay. So for example, individuals who are colorblind, they may need contrasting colors and patterns in order to view material that you provide them. People with certain visual impairments, such as cataracts, rely on high contrast themes to see apps and content with less eye strain. With the high contrast mode turned on, the icons on the Office ribbon are more visible to someone with reduced contrast sensibility. So really important that we include high contrast backgrounds, and is thinking about and considering that when we create our PowerPoint presentations in the classroom, they might be really good for us to look at, but are they actually going to be available to all learners in the classroom? What you can also see then on the right hand side is some other warnings as well. Okay, so you've got the things like tables have merged or split cells. You've got a reading order, and is it in the right place, so you can play around with that. You've also then got some tips around duplicating slide titles, and you've also then got the suggested intelligent services in terms of alternative text and the text that's available for you there. Okay, so you can click onto it, you can approve description as you go through. So essentially, PowerPoint and Word will do a lot of this work for you, but it's just taking that time when we have the time to just go through and think, right, the presentation I've created, for all audiences that are going to be consuming this information, are they going to be able to consume it, and is it going to be accessible to all? What I will do is I will put this presentation up into the Teamspace. So if you'd like to have a go then, that playing around with some of this information, some of the tools that we've just shown and gone through now, you'll be able to do that by going on to the Teamspace and using it. Okay, so just a quick to go back over what we've just gone through. The great tool to use to create accessible content is that accessibility checker, and you'll find that built into several Office 365 applications, Mac applications, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote, and Outlook. And what it can do, it'll run proactively in the background of your file. And what hopefully it should do is alert you to any real-time issues that make your content difficult for people to read or to access. Before you share your content, run that accessibility checker to find and fix any issues that might make your content difficult to access. And for people with visual disabilities, accessibility checker will identify heading structure, alternative text, order of content, etc. So it's very comprehensive in what it's able to do. So in a nutshell, this evening, it's been a very sort of quick introduction to what a digitally inclusive classroom is and how it's important that we are digitally inclusive. We've had a quick look at how we create accessible content using that review tool and using the accessibility checker, which is available in PowerPoint and also available in Word and Outlook and all those other tools that we just discussed. Next week, it's going to be a bit more in depth, and we're going to look specifically at inclusive reading. What does that look like, and what are the powerful tools that we have available to us in our classrooms to support reading? And if you've not seen Immersive Reader before, we're going to spend a lot of time next week looking at that and the power that that Immersive Reader has. So please do share this with your colleagues, share this with anyone that you work or friendly with in other schools. It'd be great to see more people come along to access these sessions. This session, whilst being short, will be recorded. It has been recorded and will be put into the chat space, the team space, sorry. Could I ask all of you now if you could just take 2 minutes to just complete the short program evaluation form. We'll get one of these each week and will help us to develop the program even further. And just to say a huge thank you for your time this evening. I understand on a Monday it's always quite difficult to stay behind sort of after school. So please do take a look at the recording and share that recording with others. But if you could spend just 2 minutes completing that end of program evaluation form, that'd be great. To do that, you can scan the QR code or click on the link at the bottom of the screen there, and that will take you through to the evaluation section form. If anyone's having any issues with that, please let me know. And if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat, or feel free now. I'm going to just stop the recording. Feel free to put your microphone on and ask away. Thank you.